to Beyond the Nexus. I'm Gillyweed, joined here by my co-host Dreadnaught. Dread, why don't you let our viewers know what they can expect from the show?
We're going to be getting into the players' heads, analyzing their games, and help you guys at home learn to play like the pros.
That's right, we are all about Heroes of the Storm with esports coverage from every single region. And this episode is a special one as we are previewing the Summer Global Championships.
We're going to be exploring the top 12 teams in the world and covering all of their strengths and weaknesses, and let you guys at home know what players to look out for.
But don't just take our word for it, let's get into it and go beyond the Nexus. We're starting with Korea, and not only the previous global champions, but the team that's been considered the top of the region for as long as Super League has existed, and that is MVP Black.
Even when they lost to TNL to qualify for BlizzCon 2015, people felt like MVP Black was robbed. Since then, they went on to win the Spring Global Championship and also the Chinese Gold League.
Yet again, though, they failed to win this season of Super League, falling 0-4 to Tempest in the Grand Finals. But even with that, they still have the most impressive record in the world, going 35-8 in games since spring.
So let's look at what makes them so dominant. First of all, they are phenomenal at refining draft choices of not only themselves, but their opponents. It seems like they take the best of the meta that is happening all over the world and hone it into something that is perfect. Second is their early game aggression. They heavily commit to objectives early on and time things out perfectly to strike their opponents at their weakest point. Lastly, and probably most importantly, they've been very vocal about their lack of motivation. They've even suggested doing some role swaps, and even though MVP Black probably has some of the most mechanically skilled players in the world, I don't think it's going to matter, because when you role swap, it doesn't take only mechanical skill, it's an entire mentality shift. And with the short amount of time they have going into summer, I fear whether or not they can make it work.
Determining an MVP for this team was particularly difficult, but we've decided to give it to Captain Sake, arguably the best ranged assassin in the world. At one point, he had a ridiculous win streak on Kael'thas, and in Season 1 was straight up considered the best Greymane player to exist. And just like with Tychus, he is the assassin player that ranged assassins from all over the world try to emulate. And you never know what he will excel with next. Dread, I have to know, is the bad loss versus Tempest an omen of further bad things to come for MVP Black, or do you think it was just a fluke?
I definitely don't think we can call it a fluke, considering they lost games on Cursed Hollow in like 9 minutes and were 3-level leaded in a couple of situations. Tempest was the better team that day, and honestly, with how vocal MVP has been, I have a hard time putting my faith in them. But speaking of Tempest, there's a new face at the top of Korea, and it all started when Lockdown left MVP at the beginning of the year.
Tempest lost to both TNL and MVP Black early on in Super League, which meant they had to fight their way back through the losers bracket, eventually defeating TNL to make it to the Grand Finals. They always had a strong roster, but their synergy was not great at the beginning of the season, and they worked hard to improve that.
Yeah, they're the most improved team this season, and actually the first team to take a series off MVP Black since Team Liquid did back in December.
Their main strength, besides good individual play, is their rotations and allocation of heroes to capture multiple objectives. They'll use their warrior player to either stall opponents while they take a neutral camp, or at least keep an eye on opponents so his team knows exactly how much they can get away with. They also can aggressively rotate in the early game, but know how to not get behind if they don't find the picks. Probably their biggest weakness is that this is the first time Tempest is competing as a group internationally. And if nerves make previous habits resurface, it could throw off that newfound synergy. Additionally, if their opponents are also good at rotations, they might be able to beat Tempest at their own game, finding them separated getting multiple objectives, or even just in the way they team fight, which is generally to put somebody in the back line to distract while they kill off someone in the front.
And our MVP for Tempest is actually going to be Lockdown, who does a great job at distracting his opponents on one side of the battle so his teammates can wail on his opponent's backline. He's very well known for his false ad, so much so that you can expect teams to target ban him specifically. But if he gets his hands on the hero, you won't be asking yourself, isn't Falstad dead? Instead, it will be, how long did Lockdown let his opponents live?
Blue team dominated.
Gilly Tempest obviously holds on to Falstad very highly because they have such success with him. Do you think they depend on him too much?
Well, obviously Lockdown just knows something about Falstad that the rest of Super League does not, because if you take out all of the wins they had with that hero, he barely won in Super League at all, and there were a lot of teams trying to play Falstad. So I think if they can get their hands on him, of course they're going to draft him, but they also know that he'll be banned a lot versus them and have to be preparing for that accordingly. But we are moving on to China and the top team in the region, who is Estar. We have yet to see Estar in their final form internationally. They qualified for BlizzCon, but couldn't go because of visa issues. And then at Spring Global Championships, couldn't play with Zhao Ti because of some health problems.
Historically, they've been the best team in China, but at the international level haven't put up the best results because, again, they haven't had their roster at the majority of the competition.
Now, hopefully we'll get to see all 5 members ready to go for Sweden, because it is a very strong team and has been so for a long time.
They also have great teamfight manipulation, constantly constricting the movement of their opponents into bad positioning, and that's when Estar is going to strike. Don't get me wrong, Estar is one of the best teams in the world, but I do expect them to struggle with late-game teamfights at the Summer Global Championship.
When you look at how synergized Estar is, it really comes down to the founder of the team and the rock of it, and that's Zhao Ti, which is why we've decided to make him the MVP of Estar. In his time playing on Estar, Zhao Ti has played different roles, but he's always the leader. So look for some great teamfight engagement initiations from Zhao Ti specifically. Dread, Tempest have now beaten MVP Black. Can Estar do the same?
I think this is the best shot. Largely because we had a recent patch, and it feels like China creates metas, and it seems like MVP kind of perfects them. If they don't show a lot of their picks and bans going up to when they face MVP Black, I think they have what it takes this time. But let's look at Estar's counterpart coming out of the Chinese region, X Team, which is one of the most improved teams in the world starting from the beginning of the season till now.
Absolutely. For the longest time, X-Team has been a mid-tier team in China. They even started off this season of the Gold League not faring so well, barely making it out of the group stage. But then playoffs happened and just something turned on for X-Team, defeating teams that nobody thought they would, like Estar Gaming and OMG, to qualify.
They really have a true underdog story, struggling very heavily early on in the season and now have made it to the Summer Global Championship.
Yeah, some of the things that helped them get to that point is, one, they're very synchronized. Like Estar, X-Team have a very strong leader in Elegant, who helps keep the team on the same page. Also, they're good at being able to punish the mistakes of their opponents, which is why we saw them bring down Estar Gaming. But X-Team still have a lot to work on. First, they are not invulnerable to tilt. In their series versus Estar, each game got progressively worse for them, especially when it came down to positioning. As things started to look not so great, we saw them making more errors like face-checking bushes, or not taking the safe rotation to objectives, even grouping up too much versus things like Mosh Pit and Void Prison. Finally, one issue they still have too is some of the players have limited hero pools, which is something Estar really took advantage of in that series, never letting all of their players have their comfort picks at the same time.
But one of the players that doesn't seem to have these struggles is Misaka, which is going to be our MVP for X-Team. Misaka is the player of Zul, which is the team's highest win rate hero. But when I think of the Chinese region, I think of Sylvanas, and again, he is the player for that team, getting great Haunted Wave escapes and 1v1s throughout all of his games. Look out for this specialist player to have great rotations, getting free XP in the early game, but then also making it to teamfights, getting kills and objectives in the late game. But Gilly, what do you think is the most crucial for them to fix in order to do well at the Summer Global Championship?
Without a doubt, it would be the smaller hero pools for players. X-Team really has some very innovative favorite heroes and even their map. So work on that and we could see them go pretty far in this event.
Best heroes player in the world?
Probably Rich from MP Black.
My personal favorite is Lockdown. He used to play for MVP Black.
It's hard for me to say there's like a best player in the world at the game.
Man, that's really hard.
It's really hard to tell. Actually, I think it's impossible.
Best player in the world right now?
I'd say Rich is probably the best player in the world.
That's a pretty good question.
MVP Black's Rich.
Are we allowed to answer ourselves?
To MVP Sake.
There's tons of great players out there that all excel at different roles.
Let's look a little closer to home at North America, starting with Team Naventic. Naventic looked to be the strongest and most consistent team in the region up until the second regional grand finals, where they were shut out by Gale Force Esports.
They have some of the strongest mechanical players in North America, and they display this through role swapping and still having success as a team. But at the Spring Global Championship, they didn't perform as well as people thought they would, only placing 7th and 8th.
I think they'll be hungry to improve that result, especially since some of the longest standing and most decorated North American Heroes players are part of what makes Naventic successful.
Expect Zuna and Fan to be able to make the big plays whenever the team needs it. Typically, Naventic has solid draft patterns showing influence from both the Korean and Chinese regions. They're also very aggressive, having really good invades and 5-man rotations as a team, always capitalizing on their opponent's mistakes. In short, they know how to punish. But there's also a lot of cons when you look at Naventic. They seem to crumble at the first signs of tilt. Zuna's aggressive positioning can sometimes only give his opponents the upper hand. They're also very vulnerable to their own emotions, and this is very visible to see when it comes to individual decision-making and shot calling as a team in the middle of a series.
The player to watch out for from Naventic is Fan, winner of Heroes of the Dorm and BlizzCon 2015. He is a true flex player, playing multiple roles during his Heroes career. But it's great to see him back on the melee flex position, since he is a consistently outstanding player. You can always expect good play and a good mental outlook from Fan, and his passion is contagious. Dread, Naventic looks so good after picking up big impact, but now with this defeat, how do you think they're going to fare going into Sweden?
I don't think it's going to be very good for them going into summer. Fan looked absolutely devastated after their loss. Zuna and Kemo looked like they were almost at each other's throats. I just fear the same problems from the Spring Global Championship are going to happen again at summer. But let's hope for the sake of an A, they do manage to get together before the tournament. Now let's look at the second seed in North America, Gale Force Esports, who's just coming off of a big win over Naventic.
3-0, boys!
They're a very young team, forming after Heroes of the Dorm and just before the qualifiers for the first regional. They're also a North American dream team of sorts, featuring playmakers from several different mid-tier teams coming together to form a cohesive unit.
And you can see drastic improvement in play when you take their games from DreamHack Austin, now looking onto ESL Burbank.
Oh, absolutely. Their shot calling, individual positioning, and drafting all improved in that short amount of time. Gale Force has a champion's mindset. Fury told me that every member is as hungry as he is to win. And even during the grand finals, after winning games, they wouldn't celebrate because they didn't want to get too hyped and make mistakes in the next game. They also have a lot of team unity. You can tell from their synergized play how much they enjoy playing together. But part of that comes from being a younger team and still being kind of in that honeymoon period. And of course, being a younger team has some difficulties. Namely, they're still getting used to each other's playstyles. Some of the members have limited LAN experience, and all of them will be competing for the first time internationally. So DreamHack Sweden is going to be a much different experience for all of them. And finally, although Captain Michael Udall's shot calling improved markedly for this event,
just let Leeming poke at it. Let Leeming poke at it.
There's still room for improvement, especially since he's only been doing it since Heroes of the Dorm.
But our MVP for Gale Force Esports is going to be Crowan. Even though it was his second land at ESL Burbank, he without a doubt was an MVP of the entire event. He's very much known for his Li Ming play, so much so that we question why teams weren't banning it out against him.
I posted once on Twitter, I said Li Ming's gonna make me famous one day. It looks like it came true.
If Li Ming is left up at the Summer Global Championship, expect Crowan to pick her and carry on her. But Gilly, on a more serious note, can I get your best Michael Udall impression?
Wait. I mean, how was that?
Nailed it.
Nice. Let's switch to talking about Europe and the number 2 team from the region, but the one that's been looking more dominant lately thanks to all of their hard work. And that is MyInsanity.
MyInsanity is the only European team to make it to the grand finals of the regionals for the past 3 events. They managed to take DreamHack tours without even dropping a single game and locking in first place. But at the Spring Global Championship, they only placed 7th and 8th, losing to both Estar and Cloud9.
But they've only gotten stronger from there, and that's largely attributed to the fact that they are known for how hard they work to improve.
They're very well known for being one of the hardest working teams in the European region, and their online versus LAN results show this.
Keep shooting the clock. Got some evade. I'm on Bala. Nice. Bala.
They train very hard before tournaments to be the best version of themselves. They have a creative playstyle and a very unique approach to the game, which causes them to be very difficult to be able to predict in drafts. But this innovation could also be their weakness. Europe has a very unique, long and drawn-out playstyle, and MyInsanity only can play against European teams effectively while preparing for the Summer Global Championship. So out of the meta picks like Lunara that thrive against that playstyle that Europe presents, has great success. But you need to keep in mind that MyInsanity can only effectively scrim European teams. So these picks like Lunara and having success might provide false positives, and these are the type of things that might come back to haunt them at the Summer Global Championship.
We've talked a lot about improvement and hard work for the team, so of course we've got to give the MVP to support player Splendor. I'd even go as far as to say that he is the most improved player from all of Europe. At the summer season, he had a 100% win rate with Karazim, and because that was 2 regionals, that's 15 games, never dropping a single one. He's also the drafter for the team and one of the main masterminds behind MyInsanity's uniqueness. Now, Dread, we're talking about MyInsanity, so I got to throw a hard-hitting question out to you. Are we going to have the bouncy dryad Lunara on the world stage?
Yeah. I mean, MyInsanity has had such great success with it, I don't see why they'll stop now. I am fearful that they'll just kind of keep forcing it in situations where it's not working out very well. At the same time, they're a very diverse team, so maybe they'll be able to adapt if that situation happens. But we have to keep in mind that MyInsanity's rivals, Team Dignitas, will also be at the Summer Global Championship. Post-BlizzCon, where they got second, Team Dignitas was the most dominant power in all of Europe, only confirming their position by winning in Leicester.
But after that event, they went through a roster swap, bringing in Alex the Pro-G to replace Wubby. And that's where the problems started, and the second regionals didn't even make it out of the group stage.
There are some struggles recently, but let's look at what Dignitas is doing right.
Okay, well, first off, they have a strong leadership in Bakery. Also, great individual play, especially in their mage player, Mene. They also have a lot of LAN experience, which for them translates into keeping their composure when games get tough. And finally, up until the second regionals, they were the best drafters in Europe. At the first regionals, they were the only team that accurately predicted how much more influential Gale Force would be over Li Ming. And that obviously brought them great success. They didn't even drop a game at that event. But right around the time of the roster swap, a bunch of problems started to emerge. First, at the second regionals, there were a lot of communication issues where players seemed to be not on the same page. And potentially some of the drafting issues of Navi carried over with Alex to Team Dignitas. Now, Bakery has defended this roster swap constantly, saying the communication problems they had were due to the fact that he was sick at the event and he could barely talk. And they incorrectly identified the way the meta was going, which is why they had problems in the draft. But with the timing of all of these issues, it's hard not to wonder if the roster swap isn't affecting them negatively in some way. But if there was ever a time to prove that they made the right choice, it's at Sweden.
But we have chosen our MVP for Team Dignitas, and that player is Mene. He is a big playmaker for Team Dignitas with great positioning to always maximize his damage output. He is very well known for being a mage player because he almost only plays things like Falstad, Jaina, and Kel'Thas. Kel'Thas is actually Team Dignitas' highest win rate hero and in their third most played. And because of that, it always feels like Kel'Thas and the rest of Dignitas' fate is in Mene's hands. But Gilly, things have not been going very well for Team Dignitas recently. So do you expect any major changes moving into the Summer Global Championship?
Well, when they brought in Alex the Pro-G, they moved their previous warrior player over to the flex position. That's why we saw JPL playing things like Tyrande. But now with the latest patch, double warrior is far more appealing as a meta. So with 2 warrior players, I think it's very likely that if they're going to do something crazy, it could be that. That's our 4 major regions, but there are still 4 more. From Taiwan, we have Please Buff Arthas. From Latin America, it's Big Gods. From Australia and New Zealand, we have Negative Synergy. And finally, for Southeast Asia, there's Renovatio 1. Now, all of the teams from these regions in the Spring Global Championship struggled, not being able to make it out of the first group stage.
And the main reasoning for this is because it's harder for these areas to find scrim partners. There's fewer tournaments and less people trying to play professionally, so overall it's just harder for them to make those adjustments. But we got to keep in mind that these guys truly are the best in their regions. 3 out of the 4 teams that are going to Summer competed in Spring, and the one team that didn't, 3/5 of the members competed in Spring.
Looking at the gameplay, if I were to give the edge to any of these teams, especially who might get an upset into the second group stage, it'd have to be Please Buff Arthas from Taiwan. Even though they're a new team, they have quite a lot of synergy because the players have played with each other on other teams before. Also, they're good at invading mercenary camps and timing them with objectives. And finally, they have quick decision making in order to widen any leads they get.
Favorite hero?
My favorite hero has to be Muradin. He can soak a lot of damage, and at the same time, once you get to level 20, he just has the kill potential of an assassin, so you can make really big plays.
참 좋아하는 형들이 많은데 그 중에서 그레이메인이 좋은 것 같아요. Greymane or Kel'Thas?
I think Gale Boss.
The hero I like playing the most is Lost Vikings. You can do a lot of unique things with this hero that you cannot with any other hero. You can come up with very wild stuff that other people wouldn't even believe.
아서스가 제일 좋은 것 같아요.
Kerrigan. And I just like the mechanics of her, being able to jump around and combo, and you can make huge plays.
Many of you may not know the entire backstory success of all the teams heading to battle it out at DreamHack Sweden.
So here at Beyond the Nexus, we put together a power rankings list based on the level of play and success of each and every team since their showings at the world stage last.
To start off, we put Estar at number 1. This is with the expectation that Zhao Ti will be playing with the team and being able to be a leader. Next, we put Tempest. This is because they've recently been able to 4-0 MVP Black in a best of 7, but we fear they have no international experience, so they won't be able to take the China powerhouse that is Estar. And third, we're going to put MVP Black. How the mighty have fallen, but there's still a great group of players that might be able to make something happen.
At number 4, X Team was a tough one, as we have MyInsanity in the next 4, starting at number 5. We love the innovation from MyInsanity, but we're not sure how it's going to work on the global stage. But X Team themselves have a lot to work on. We're keeping X Team at 4 and MyInsanity at 5, but the decision between the two was pretty tough to make.
We also had Naventic higher originally, but with their lack of performance at the second North American regional, we feel like they do not belong in that position.
And similarly with Team Dignitas, you started at the top, now you're here. It's time to prove those roster swaps were the right move.
For Gale Force Esports, we put them at the lower end because they do show a lot of promise and can probably make it out of the first group stage. But they're a very young group of guys with zero international experience, so we don't think they'll go too far.
Moving on to the final 4 teams, we're going off of not only previous spring championship results, but regional results this summer. And looking at that, we're putting Please Buff Arthas at the top of these final 4. This is our expectation, but if anyone makes an upset, we still do believe it will be them.
That's where we place the top 12 teams in the world, but anything can happen at DreamHack Sweden.
That does it for us here at Beyond the Nexus.
Tune in at 2:15 a.m. Pacific to see the Summer Global Championship.
We'll see you then.